Hello, I'm David Sibbitt, co-author of the Drexler-Sibbitt Team Performance Model, and this video is to explain the model and some of the underlying thinking behind it and the tools that are linked to that model. I worked for many years with Alan Drexler, and he liked to start with asking, what is a team? He distinguishes between work that can be done independently on one end of a scale of interdependence and work that requires cooperation on the other. Work that can be done independently is best described as a work group. Work that requires cooperation is really what deserves the word team, and is where you need to really spend more time on development practice and such. And if you just apply teaming and team development across the boards without making these distinctions, it's not as effective as if people know that there are different levels of intensity that you have to engage in order to really get performance. So what is performance? Well, performance is about mastering the process of teaming, which simply can be thought of as sequencing together the answer to why you're meeting, who you're working with, what is the context and the goals that you're aiming at, and how you're going to do it. So when is it useful to understand a process like this? First off, if you have a new manager orienting to his, her, their job and needing to anticipate challenges, is extremely helpful. Two, if you're starting up a new team that needs to respect different contributions and identify predictable issues. Three, if you're assessing improvement areas for existing teams or pivoting to virtual work. Four, supporting organizational change of almost any sort. And having a common language for meeting and workshop design. So the origins of the model was with Alan Drexler's work in the 1980s. He comes out of National Training Labs training and applied his expertise with teams and group process to matrix organizations, and was using a Gibb-Drexler-Weisbord team building model when I met him, which reflected in a stair-step kind of graphic the 4 questions that the groups predictably ask whenever they're cooperating. I was running a group graphics workshop in Annapolis, where Alan lives, and I was also an organizational consultant and pioneer in visual facilitation, applying an integrative theory of process to design and facilitate visual meetings. And I really liked that Gibb-Drexler-Weisbord model. It really rang true, but was really only half the story and was illustrated as a stair-step building process. And we felt that more of a performance orientation ought to be emphasized. So to understand this, let's step back and look at process as it happens on 4 levels and go back to those 4 key questions. The why question is really something that happens in people's awareness and intention and inside the consciousness of people in a team. The who, however, shows up in the energetic exchange and relationships between people, represented here by this wavy orange line. What the team is doing is all about information and interpretation of symbols and numbers and graphics and all that kind of thing that make up a lot of the work of an organization. And bottom line, the how is about operations, decisions, and infrastructure. And these 4 levels are very common to anybody who is a human being standing on the earth. You've got your kind of head in the clouds and your feet on the ground, and in between you're feeling and thinking. Well, these need to integrate over time. The top line freedoms need to connect to the bottom line constraints. And you need to be able to explore around and find out how they kind of knit together. And moreover, you need to get different kinds of people to cooperate. So visionaries and strategists really love that top line work. Creatives and socializers love the relationships and energetic side of things. Planners and technicians really into the concepts and the information, and producers and project managers have their feet very much on the ground usually to get anything. And these different kinds of people, this just represents the wide range of people that are involved in any team do need to perform together to produce results. And when they do, you can get wow kinds of results. So the purpose of the team performance model is really to give people a common language that holds some of these distinctions. And we felt a new one was really needed. Linear team models didn't address the fact that teams move over time and move through these different levels of work, going from freedom to constraint and back. Teams need to understand that this creative tension actually is something they can work with. And so visualizing it was helpful. And moving from a building metaphor to a performance metaphor seemed just much closer to both of our experience with how groups work. And finally, by putting together Jack Gibbs' social science, our experience, process theory, and visualization, we felt we could produce something powerful and memorable and really useful. So let's take a look at what we came up with. Here's the team performance model in its simpler stage. And it is sometimes affectionately called the bouncing ball model because it shows on the creating side how teams move from top-line freedoms to bottom-line constraints and trying to figure out, are they really interdependent, needing to commit to working together tightly? And on the right side, how they can sustain performance over time by mastering those constraints. So we spent a fair amount of time thinking about the graphics and how to make these points clear so that when you use the model, you can remember these things. One is by graphically having the top-line freedoms represented at the top of the page and the bottom-line constraints represented by a platform, which can stand for the physical environment of the team or an infrastructure that virtual teams are bouncing off of. And we also spent a lot of time on the graphics that are underlying the words in the model so that you can remember these four levels. So the attentional level is kind of a light bulb radiating. The energetic level is kind of a wave-like icon. The informational level is a target. And the operational level, the physical level, is a physical ball that casts a shadow. So by putting the keys, the focal questions, coming out of Jack Gibbs' research on these, we got a very clear idea of how you would go about creating a team, which is you want to be able to do things that allow people to answer these four questions. But you don't necessarily do them in that sequence all the time. Sometimes people jump into the what they're going to do and then back into the who and the why. Jack's research suggested that when people don't have clear answers, they tend not to proceed and tend to go backwards. So we also labeled these with words that would spark the right conversation in the group. So we spent a lot of time, for instance, on the trust building word, which in some other models is called storming, but we felt the word trust actually called up the right conversation. It's not just about interpersonal trust and interpersonal dynamics, it's also about, do you trust the competencies of the people you're working with? And under clarification stage 3, goals are the most important thing to clarify, but also the background assumptions and history and a lot of research that might be going into what you're doing. And finally, bottom line is the commitment to how to work. If you are working independently, you only need a certain amount of resolution of these different stages. If you're planning on working interdependently, you might need more, because the very next part of it is overcoming those constraints to regain freedom and high performance. So we ended up illustrating the stage 5 here, which we called implementation, as the sequence of the items on the left. It's who does what, when, and where. And it's understanding the sequence of activities aiming toward a goal that allows for solid implementational performance. But there is a state of high performance that can occur when people master their processes and their procedures and their sequences, and can go to a point where they can improvise and be flexible in the face of changes. And as you regain freedom, you're also taking on a certain amount of uncertainty. And so high performance is not a steady state that is static, like a set of stairs and just stays there. You need to invest in renewal practices that allow you to become conscious of the practices you're using. So we spent quite a bit of time identifying the indicators that show that you've resolved these challenges or that they're not resolved. And these indicators are all reflected in the materials that accompany the model, but they're most importantly reflected in the team performance survey, which asks questions for each of the 7 challenges. In this case, I've got an example of the trust building page here. And the key indicators of trust are mutual regard between people, a certain amount of forthrightness, and a certain amount of reliability. And the questions, for instance, our team confronts issues and conflicts directly, would be an example of forthrightness. Here you can see the dots show kind of a spread of attention to that. So half the team thinks they are and half they aren't. So this then provides a really great springboard for having a conversation around what's really working on our team and what are the opportunities for improvement. And all the answers are then rolled up into a bar graph at the top that's represented anonymously. But as you go across the 7 different stages, you can begin to see a pattern of, people who need to be brought along more, or people who have issues that need to be raised, and that sort of thing. Real performance takes fire when a team begins to really have a playbook of best practices that they can repeat as they go through this. In many organizations, people are on many different teams, and teaming is more what people are doing in many cases. And so when an organization begins to have a common language for the challenges and a common language for some of the practices, you begin to get a great deal of flexibility. Now, we're supporting all of this with team leader guides that have page-at-a-glance best practices, as well as online versions of this in Team Tools websites. And the survey itself is available online. So when teams work with this model, they have a way to springboard off of practices we've identified, but also add in their own. So I hope you can enjoy using the team performance model and tools, and enjoy the way the words and the graphics will guide you into the kinds of conversations you need to have amongst the team itself about what is really working and what do you need to improve.